And thanks for being here. This is, I'd like to call to order the January 6th Shoreline Preservation Working Group meeting of Sandag. Welcome, everybody. Before we jump into the meeting, I will ask our working group coordinator to confirm we have a quorum, which I've already done that, Anna, but just to reconfirm that, we have a quorum?
Yes,
Great.
Chair Dedina, a quorum.
Great, thanks. And then I'd like to update the members and public on our process for both member and public comments. The primary members will be using their cameras and we will take live public comments. Members are asked to turn on their cameras or raise their hands when they have a comment or question, and they will recognize you to speak. And I'll also just depend on Sandag staff to help with that because I have a hard time managing. I've got two screens open, one with the agenda and one with all your lovely faces. So anyway, it reminds me of trying to be in the lifeguard tower with the old operations console. It was a nightmare for me, at least anyway. And then Anna will now provide a quick reminder on how the public comments will work. Please go ahead, Anna.
Thank you, Chair Dedina. In addition to emailing comments, the public may also provide live comments during today's meeting. In order to provide live comments, you can join today's meeting via Zoom on the link or by dialing one of the numbers from your phone that are provided on the cover page of today's meeting agenda. When public comments are called on when you are called on for public comments on the Zoom platform, click on the raise hand icon in the Zoom toolbar, which is on the top right corner of the screen, and the chair will call on you by the name you provided. If you are participating by phone, press *9 on your telephone to indicate your desire to speak. The chair will call on you by the last 4 digits of your phone number, and you can press *6 to unmute. Just a reminder that all comments, whether emailed or live, will be made a part of today's meeting record. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Chair Dedina.
Great, thank you so much. And so let's get started with the meeting. And since we're in a virtual environment, we aren't going to do full introductions, but instead I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for joining us. I did want to recognize that we have a new member from the City of Encinitas, Councilmember Joy Linz. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. Welcome to the group. Is Joy here? I know Kelly.
Joy is just here and I just promoted her.
Okay, all right. And then the second item on the agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes from the June 3rd, 2021 meeting. Are there any public comments on this item? Please raise your hands if there are. It's not public comments, just public comments on the agenda item, on the minutes. All right. No, I don't see any any hands raised.
No hands raised.
Okay, great. Are any member comments on the minutes? May I have a motion to approve this item?
So moved, Mayor Dedina. Bill Sankey.
Good. Okay, great. We have any second?
I'll second. This is Councilmember Bhat Patel.
Great. You want to read that, Anna, then? I have a motion by Bill Sankey and a second by, I'm sorry, who did that? Was that Joe?
No, it was Priya Bhat Patel.
Oh, sorry. And I'll call on Anna for the roll call vote, please. Please say yes, no, or abstain. Hold on.
I'll begin the roll call vote right now. So we'll start with City of Imperial Beach, Mayor Dedina.
Yes.
Thank you. City of Del Mar, Vice Chair Dwight Warden.
Yes.
Thank you. City of Carlsbad, Councilmember Bhat Patel.
Aye.
Thank you. City of Chula Vista, Steve Padilla. I believe Chula Vista is absent. City of Coronado, Councilmember Sankey.
Sankey, yes.
Thank you. City of Encinitas, Councilmember Hinsey.
Yes.
Thank you. City of National City, I believe National City is absent today. City of Oceanside, Councilmember Keim.
Yes.
Thank you. City of San Diego, Councilmember LaCava.
Yes.
Thank you. And City of Solana Beach, Deputy Mayor Becker.
Yes.
Thank you. County of San Diego is absent. The Port of San Diego, Commissioner Malcolm. I thought I saw, okay. I think Port of San Diego is absent, and we have US Navy Walter Wilson. He is also absent.
Walt Wilson, I'm here. Yes, and I'd like to have an opportunity to introduce my supervisor who will be taking my place as I retire.
Go ahead. Well, yeah, go ahead.
I will be retiring in April, and Jason Golumsky Jones, my supervisor, some of you know him, will be taking my place on the Shoreline Preservation Committee.
Great. Well,
He's here.
thanks for that. Welcome, Jason, and congratulations on your future impending retirement.
Thanks, Serge.
Great.
And
Oh, go ahead, Anna.
Oh, yeah, and the item passes with all members present.
Great. Awesome. So we'll move on to item number 3, public comments, communication member comments. Members of the public shall have the opportunity to address the working group on any issue within the jurisdiction of Sandag that is not on this agenda. But I'll ask members of the public who wish to offer public comment not related to today's agenda item. So if this is related to Oceanside, save your comments for the end of that discussion. Anyway, please do your hand raise so we can call on you if you have general comments or public comments. I'll count on you, Anna, to see if that's hands raised.
I'm not seeing any. Oh, wait, I'm not seeing any hands raised at the moment.
Okay. Great. And then any member comments?
Serge, may I make a member comment?
Absolutely.
So I want to update the Shoreline Preservation Committee on the fact that the Bay of San Diego also has some significant shoreline projects going on. We're working on an oyster bed soft shore that is quite successful. And they're also looking at grant monies for a study of different ways to armor the bay. And EcoCrete has been a product that they're using on Harbor Island that's been quite successful. The city of Coronado recently completed their sea level rise vulnerability study, and the 2 places where that are deemed most danger are the adjacent seawall to the Coronado Yacht Club, and also the building that it used to be the chart house in Coronado, the boathouse. And so the city's looking at a project that might raise that particular building several feet on the pilings it's on, at very preliminary stages there. And the Yacht Club applied for a grant to do some soft shore mitigation measures along its bayfront as well. We did not score on that project. But what I'm hoping we can do at an upcoming meeting of this group is to have port staff and whoever else should be involved in this, maybe Navy as well, update the committee on the efforts, not just on the ocean side, but on the bay side of the shoreline preservation efforts that are going on in the bay. I know the port's continuing in this effort, and I think they would enjoy the opportunity to share some of their successes and lessons learned as well. So if I could make that suggestion to the staff and Mr. Chair, if you kind of push that along, that would be great.
That's actually a really great idea, Bill. Thanks. I'll definitely do that. And I think obviously the issue, that's why we had a national city in Chula Vista. I think the issue of bayfront and bays, what's happening in bays and lagoons, I think is critical. And obviously looking ahead to how to proactively address these commercial properties or, public recreational, public-private recreational, facilities like the chart house or the chart house building and also the yacht club. So yeah, super important stuff. And I know anything else?
Serge, I have my hand up.
Oh, yeah, I see that. Go ahead.
Great. I want to give a visual update. Behind me in my background, you'll see the current state of the seawall that's been installed at where the slide happened in Del Mar in March of 2021. So the lower area here is about 10 feet tall, and the area here, it rises to about 25 feet tall, and it's backfilled with riprap about 6 feet wide behind this wall. And you'll also see right here are the drain pipes outflowing with about 5 gallons per minute, I've been told, of fresh water that flows out of the hill and through the pipes and out this wall. So this is what's out there now. This photo was taken on Saturday.
Thanks. I just want to say any other comments on that, but first, thanks for the update. That is just a great example of seeing an agency, Sandag and the city of Del Mar and all the other agencies involved responding immediately to a threat. right? Like really impressive to see the way that moved quickly. Let's hope that's a template for every other climate related, storm related infrastructure investment we need to make on the coast. And obviously we need to do a lot more, but I was really pleased to see how fast and the quality work that's gone on, and also the public communication of why it was critical. So yeah, at least from the outside is an
Right,
interesting.
and on top of it, it's a removable seawall, we've been told.
Well, anyway, still kudos for the speedy work on that, and obviously that highlights the need to address that whole corridor, right? So anyway, with that, additional questions, comments from members? I'm assuming that'll be a big issue to address in the future meetings. So anyway, okay, we'll move on. Let me just get the agenda up. Oh, and just to make sure, no public comments, Anna?
No public
No
comments.
additional member comments?
No additional member
Okay,
comments.
great. And now we'll turn it over to Keith Greer, and has a couple of public announcements. Take it away, Keith.
Thank you, Chair Janita. Hello, working group. Happy New Year. This is my favorite working group, and I can honestly say that. I know Hassan overuses that, but I enjoy the topics you guys cover. I just want to give a quick update on the Sandag's 2021 regional plan and where we're going over the next year, 2 years, 3 years. So on December 10th, 2021, the Sandag Board of Directors adopted the 21 regional plan, and it paints a 30-year vision for transportation and sustainable land uses in the region. We now move on in this year to early actions, and there's a list of about 24 early actions that will start being implemented. As we've been looking ahead towards the implementation, staff has been kind of determining what the board and policy advisory committees need for implementation of the regional plan. And one of the areas we've been looking into is that over 24 plus working groups that we have. And I know that this committee, as a long-time working group, knows this, but our working groups advise the policy advisory committees on policies and projects. They also provide an information sharing, like today, we're going to be talking about some really cool things for information. And they point a point of collaboration and coordination amongst the agencies. So the working groups right now, though, they're kind of in a disarray in terms of there's no consistency. So we have working groups, we have technical advisory committees, we have task force, and those terminologies get used interchangeably. There's no consistency on membership. Some groups meet regularly, some haven't met for 2 years. Some have to cancel due to lack of quorum, and some are Brown Act and some are not. So there's considerable behind the scenes work that is required to set up these working groups. So we're going to kind of go back and look at the working groups in general and what needs to occur going forward. So in February, we'll be discussing with the Sandag Board of Directors Executive Committee to stand up 2 new working groups. One we'll be calling the Mobility Working Group, which will inform the Transportation Committee on how best to implement the regional plan from a transportation perspective. The other one will be a Sustainable Communities Working Group, which will report to the Regional Plan Committee, and we'll do the same for sustainable land uses and sustainable under the SCS of our plan. So it gives also an opportunity then to clean up some of the existing working groups, nomenclature, the review of the memberships, charters. So you're asking, what does this mean to this group? So I don't envision many changes you'll notice. We were probably proposing a name change from working group to probably a technical advisory committee. So maybe you'll be called the Shoreline Preservation Technical Advisory Committee, or maybe to update it, maybe it's Shoreline Resiliency Task Force. I don't know, we can probably talk about that. But I think a name to be consistent with other working groups would make sense. I still envision you'll meet quarterly, and that would not change. Membership would not change. We would like to change the meeting from a Brown Act meeting to a non-Brown Act meeting, due to if there potentially is a lack of quorum in the future, you can still have the meeting if it's not Brown Act. The Office of General Counsel is looking into that, but we'd still have meeting minutes. We'd still have noticing for transparency, inclusiveness. We would probably also look at your charter, probably add some realignment of the charter to the regional plan itself, and maybe add in some of the things that have occurred since your charter was first adopted, like sea level rise considerations. So that's what we're envisioning for the working groups going forward, at least for the as we see it right now. I just want to address this in case you hear that Sandag's changing its working groups, that you'll know what this is in larger context of implementing the regional plan. And I don't see many substantive changes for this group itself. So with that, I'd turn it back to the chair or answer any questions that there may have.
Great. I see that Kanani has her hand up.
Sorry, that was a mistake.
Okay. And then go ahead, Dwight.
Yeah, thanks, Serge. Keith, can you just clarify, will this group have a chance to weigh in on a draft, whatever revisions are coming for the Shoreline group?
Yeah, so it will first go to our executive committee to say, this is what we're thinking about and get direction from the executive committee. And then we circle back in with the working groups themselves and say, this is what's being proposed.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That process.
Thanks.
Additional questions or comments for Keith or on that issue? Great. Are there any public comments on that, Anna?
I don't see any hands raised in the public. Chair
Okay.
Dina.
Thanks, Keith. I definitely, I'm sure, as you know, it's considered the Cool Kids Beach Club committee at Sandag, but honestly, it's been really illuminating to be on and rewarding to be on this committee. It's just a great group of folks, obviously technical experts that is really primed to help make these big decisions or help us make decisions and informed decision-making as we move forward for these really tough issues that we have to address related to sea level rise and climate change and coastal flooding and coastal erosion. So anyway, great. It's been really interesting and I think provides a great template for how these technical working groups are structured. More important, it doesn't seem to have any lack of participation. So, which I think is great. So anyway, and I want to thank Sandag staff for helping really make that happen, but obviously all of you. So anyway, it's a really interesting good group of people. I think, Dwight, were you the first member of that committee? Because I think if you guys don't know this, when I was involved in efforts to stop a breakwater back in high school, Dwight, I think you were involved in that effort. If I wasn't, which means
Yes, I was. Yes, I was.
Yeah. So anyway, that's how long Dwight has been engaged in this process. So it's really great to have someone as knowledgeable and experienced as Dwight still engaged in all of this work. So
Still
anyway,
pounding sand and still tilting at windmills.
and
Yep.
thanks for helping us stop a breakwater project in Imperial Beach, literally at the last minute. Anyway, with that, we'll move on to item number 4, regional shoreline sediment management policies, projects, and research. We have a panel of 3 presentations today for this item. There will be an opportunity for question and answers at the end of the presentation, so please hold your questions until then. I'll just announce who's going to speak, just to make sure we're all clear on this though. Sandag is not a regulatory agency that provides permitting for a project in Oceanside. I just want to make sure that we're all clear about that. We're not the Coastal Commission. We're not even the city of Oceanside. We're here. This is an effort to get some information out and be transparent and open and provide a regional context for how we address some of these shoreline sediment and shoreline management programs. So just to make sure we're clear, and we appreciate everybody being here and who's giving a talk. First, we're going to have Chris Webb, supervisory coastal scientist at Moffitt Nichols. He'll be talking on the coastal regional sediment management activities by Sandag. Then after Chris, we'll have Russ Cunningham, principal planner from the city of Oceanside. Thanks so much, Russ, for being here. With support for Brian Leslie, senior coastal scientist and project manager for GHD, with an update on the city of Oceanside sand nourishment and retention concept. And then lastly, we'll have a presentation from Bill O'Reilly, research and development engineer at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, with information regarding the region's beaches and nearshore sediment transport. So great group lined up. And with that, I will start. And then thanks again, everybody, for being here. I'll take it away, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am going to pull my screen up. And I'd like to know if the folks can see a presentation file in PowerPoint, and I'll try to get that's the last slide. Get the first slide pulled up.
I see it.
Thank you, Dwight. Okay, so thank you very much. As the chair indicated, I'm Chris Webb. I work with a company named Moffitt & Nichols, and we've had the opportunity to help Sandag by preparing some of the prior shoreline management documents that have been actually approved by the Sandag board to help with planning of shoreline management over time within the San Diego region. So I'm just going to give you some background of what some of those documents are and what they say. And it is relative to what's being discussed today and of interest to the group. So what I'd like to do is focus the discussion on North County, San Diego. Obviously, South County and Central County have issues too with the shoreline, but North County is really the site of interest, at least for this particular discussion. So I'd like to keep my comments to that. So North County, San Diego has been an area, obviously it's beautiful, with a varying shoreline that's been eroding for ever since Oceanside Harbor was installed. So there's been erosion since the 1970s when the harbor was installed, I think in the 50s. So there's been a direct correlation of shoreline retreat in North County associated with the harbor installation because sand accumulates in the harbor, around the harbor, and collects up coast in Camp Pendleton and has a hard time getting around the harbor heading down coast. In addition to that, flood control measures have been installed within the streams of the region. So there's not as much sediment coming downstream anymore as there used to be historically because dams intercept it, as do other things such as sedimentation basins and things like that. And you add to that urban development within the watershed, paves a lot of the former natural surface. So there's less sediment yield from some of the urbanized areas into the streams and less delivery down the stream because it gets intercepted by dams. So there's just less sediment coming to the shoreline and less coming from up coast around the harbor. Add to that some significant storm events that occurred in the 1980s and then one in a season in 1990. And there was a lot of sand stripping off of the beach in North County, San Diego, and deposition in the offshore zone, and then some taken far enough offshore that it'll never come back. And then a lot taken down to La Jolla Submarine Canyon, which is its ultimate fate if it makes it that far. So the condition of the shoreline piqued the interest of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and they did something called a Coast of California study, San Diego region, in the early 1990s. I think it's dated 91. And they identified several areas in North County, San Diego that are worthy of federal attention. And those included the sites you're familiar with, Oceanside, Encinitas, and Solana Beach. All of the sites were considered not worthy of Corps attention based on the way their method of determining that. So Sandag decided, let's band together as a region and look at not just those sites, but also all the sites within North County, Central County, and South County, San Diego, and see what we can do to restore the shoreline and manage its condition over time. So they decided to monitor, design, and build their own projects. And this is just a photographic example of what the shoreline looked like at South Ponto back in, I think, 1995, where the state of California did a study of the San Diego region and determined large areas of erosion colored in red along their shoreline maps in the document that are represented by photographs such as cobble-strewn beaches. So the cobble beaches were very pervasive in the late 1980s and early 1990s. So Sandag prepared a document called the Shoreline Preservation Strategy and adopted it in 1993. And that was the strategy that actually, I think, formulated the Shoreline Erosion Committee, which transformed into the Shoreline Preservation Working Group. And that document quantified the shortage of sand within the San Diego region, and specifically North County was quantified as having lost 25 million cubic yards of sand over time. So in order to fully renourish North County, San Diego to beaches that are on the order of maybe 200 feet wide, there would have to be that much sand added to it. In addition, there's a loss rate of about 300,000 cubic yards within North County every year. So sand would need to be brought in at that rate on an annual basis afterward to keep those beaches in place. That loss rate of 300,000 cubic yards a year is really a dispersion rate of sand that moves off of the beach and out into the water and spreads throughout the nearshore zone. Some goes offshore too deep to ever come back, but a lot of it actually can come back in the summertime when wave conditions become more quiet. But it's hard to measure with monitoring equipment, so it's considered dispersed or unable to be measured. Sandag also proposed monitoring of the beaches, which started in 1996 with the Regional Beach Sand Monitoring Program done by Coastal Frontiers Corporation. And they designed and implemented two projects for Nourishment, one in 2001 called Regional Beach Sand Project 1, and the second in 2012. I'm sure you're very familiar with those. So this is activity that was spawned by this shoreline preservation strategy. Now, Sandag subsequently, 8 years later, conducted a study called, it's a planning study called the Regional Beach Sand Retention Strategy. And the retention strategy was an effort to find out, can the nourishment requirements be lessened by installing sand retention measures to hold the sand in place longer, thus realize an economic a reduction in costs over time and a value that can't just necessarily be realized with nourishment alone. So that study, we were privileged to be able to do that too. And it considered a retention measure in every city. So we met with each city and asked them what they were interested in. And for example, relevant to today, Oceanside expressed an interest in groins. And so we looked at that And in addition to the other measures in other cities, such as reefs in Carlsbad and Encinitas and Solana Beach, it was either groins or reefs, and I'm pretty sure reefs, submerged reefs just offshore were the priority of a lot of the cities. What we determined was it was actually economically justified to do sand retention in the region in addition to beach nourishment, because it would reduce the costs over time to do all that and still hold beaches in place. So there was a positive aspect of that study. An example of a groin that was installed temporarily in Oceanside back in 1971 is this grainy black and white aerial photograph. It's hard to see, but the shoreline is at the lower portion of the graphic, and the groin is this. And if you can see my cursor, it's a line that sticks out into the water, which was the location of an outfall being constructed by the wastewater treatment plant at Loma Vista Creek, the outfall there. And you can see the waves break farther offshore along that beach that was starting to accumulate on the leeward side, the up coast side of this groin, where sand was moving from south to north and collecting over here. So this document, the shoreline the sand retention strategy, offered some suggested concepts for sand retention in each city. Oceanside received a concept of a couple of groins located in the vicinity, just arbitrarily near Oceanside Boulevard, where 2 were proposed and evaluated for their performance. And what the study concluded was, yeah, they do actually hold sand longer. Yes, if they were installed along with beach nourishment, the beaches could be maintained over time at a lower cost over a period of time, such as 50 years. Yes, they could help with the sea level rise adaptation over time, and they would, essentially reduce long-term costs in investing in the shoreline of the San Diego region. So all of this thinking went into the last document that was prepared in 2009 called the Coastal Regional Sediment Management Plan. And we worked with Sandag on that and a couple of other consultants. And what we determined was, based on the monitoring done by Coastal Frontiers for Sandag of the first regional beach sand project, the dispersion rate of sand in North County, San Diego is closer to 400,000 cubic yards per year. And that's an important number, because what it means is, if there's a desire to place sand on the beach and outpace the dispersion or the losses over time, it needs to be more than 400,000 cubic yards per year. So we did an arbitrary potential project scenario just to try to help the region understand, if you were to try to manage sand and build beaches out over time, how much sand would need to be placed, where might it go, where might it come from, et cetera. And so what we came up with was a fairly round number of 1 million cubic yards per year placed in the North County area. If 1 million cubic yards of sand were placed per year, assuming about 400,000 cubic yards of that gets dispersed, but the remaining 600,000 cubic yards stays up on the beach and is visible, measurable, and usable, that would mean that it would take approximately 42 years to build back the beaches to what they were in the baseline condition before Oceanside Harbor was installed. That's a long time, but it's not impossible. And I guess the good news is that it can be done as an adaptation to sea level rise proactively. So some of the actions that were proposed for the regional sediment management plan to accomplish this were to take advantage of opportunities as they arise, called opportunistic sand. And that's a surplus from upland development projects and potentially other things, and clear out the lagoons to a point at which they are pretty devoid of sand, like pretty much clear them out. Don't just do small amounts of maintenance dredging every year, but really take all the sand out of the lagoons, put it on the coastline, and then keep them free of sand over time. That would offset a portion of that 1 million cubic yard number that we just talked about for an annual nourishment rate. And the balance could be made up by periodic actions by Sandag or the Corps of Engineers, or both, or by some new action that we talked about that would be a bypassing of sand around Oceanside Harbor by mechanical means that I'll show you in just a moment. And then finally, if there was a desire to reduce the need for nourishment over time and the cost, sand retention measures could be considered at some locations and implemented. So this is the test case project that was proposed in that plan. And what it shows is Oceanside Harbor is located right here, and Camp Pendleton is to the north with the Santa Margarita River issuing to the shoreline here. The proposal was to take sand in the nearshore zone off of the Santa Margarita River mouth in the vicinity of its historic delta, pump it around the harbor south of Oceanside Pier, which is right here, and place it either in the near shore off the beach or up on the beach or both at Oceanside, and have that serve as a feeder beach for the region and have the sand run to the south, benefiting North County, San Diego, and do that on a regular enough basis to add up to that 1 million cubic yard per year goal. So to summarize, the conclusions from the Sandag studies in the past that we came up with was that adding sand to beaches and managing that to preserve them over time adds to recreation, of course. It adds new sandy beach habitats that may not exist right now, and it adds to the protection of the backshore infrastructure. There's a significant economic return that comes from that due to recreation and tourism that's been quantified by Dr. Phil King over time. And it is a legitimate climate adaptation strategy for both the near and long term, or sorry, the near and midterm, depending on sea level rise rates. So with that, I'm done. And I can go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I can let this go to the next panelist. So I will.
Thanks, Chris. That was a lot of information tightly told. That was great editing. Anyway, and presentation information. So yeah, fascinating stuff. I'm glad we're having a historical perspective as well. And so with that, we'll move to Russ Cunningham, Principal Planner from the City of Oceanside, with support from Brian Leslie, Senior Coastal Scientist and Project Manager for GHD, with an update on the City of Oceanside's sand nourishment and retention concept. Thanks, Russ and Brian.
Excuse me, Serge. Would you mind if I asked one question before we move on?
I think, Christine, we're going to move, if it's okay, the idea is to move on and have questions at the end so we can get some information, if you don't mind. And I promise to call on you first.
Well, thank you, Chair Dedina. I will attempt to share my screen. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
We can see it.
Great, thank you. So I think it's afternoon now. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm kind of the token policy wonk sandwiched between two scientists here today, and I'm pleased to be in that context because I think it helps to emphasize the extent to which the work we're doing in Oceanside is science-based and will continue to be so. Over the past half decade, I've been involved in the city's efforts to better understand what's happening on our beachfront, explore solutions to what has been an unprecedented crisis level beach erosion condition, address public safety hazards and barriers to coastal access associated with beach loss, enhance the resilience of essential character defining coastal resources in Oceanside, and work with beachfront property owners to help them understand the risks that they face and what they can and cannot do to mitigate those risks. I myself have been a property owner in Oceanside's coastal zone for 22 years, where I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time on the beach and in the water. I've seen the city's coastline undergo enormous change over this period of time, and I have seen that change accelerate significantly over the last 5 years. As Mayor Dedina indicated, I'm joined this morning by Brian Leslie at GHD, our consultant partner who produced the most recent sand feasibility study that has generated a fair amount of interest and concern. Brian and I understand the concern, but we hope to allay it with information, with a commitment to a transparent and inclusive process, and with a promise really that the City of Oceanside is not going rogue here.
Russ, are your slides supposed to be advancing? Because they're not, just in case they are.
Yeah, no, I thank you for that, but not just yet. So we just want to acknowledge that our 3 miles of coastline are part of a larger system that has to be understood, has to be addressed in its totality. We recognize really that we're all in this together, that coastal issues are not confined to our jurisdictional boundaries, and that those boundaries should not be barriers to collaboration on matters of mutual concern. So Brian and I come in peace this morning with humility and with few preconceived notions of how we should go about restoring and maintaining beach in Oceanside. And we have a genuine interest in furthering regional dialogue and coordination on adaptation issues. So moving forward, I will say this about my presentation. There's an effort here to be as illustrative as possible. You will see imagery on every slide, including those with text. So you'll see images in the background of stretches of our coastline as they presently exist, with this example here at the terminus of Oceanside Boulevard at the ocean. So I encourage you as I go through the presentation to really look through the text to the extent that you can and take in this imagery. So just a quick overview. I'm going to share current conditions and illustrate current conditions on our coastline. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Camp Pendleton boat basin impacts, and I want to thank Chris for pointing out and pointing to the significance of the boat basin in the dynamics of the littoral cell. I will outline the key findings and recommendations of GHD's sand feasibility study. I'll share some of the key objectives of this process and concept that we are pursuing. I'll talk a little bit, I think this is important, I'll talk a little bit about the policy and regulatory and academic considerations that are germane to this effort. And then I'll share some next steps and how folks on this call can stay involved. So with respect to current conditions in Oceanside, there is no dry sand and has not been dry sand along 2/3 of the city's coastline for quite some time. We're experiencing frequent flooding and cobble projection on the Strand, which is that iconic stretch of public roadway on the beachfront. I believe it's the only public roadway on the beach in the San Diego region. That floods every king tide, regardless of the nature of the swell or wave action. And we get a dangerous situation where cobble is projected up onto the Strand. So we often have to close that public roadway to protect folks who like to come down and experience the drama of the king tide. We see frequent overtopping of the coastal revetment along residential sections of our coastline that drags sand off what are called the perched beach areas of these private properties. And I'll share an example of that with you in a moment. We have, and this is an example, we now have many unsafe and impassable public and emergency access ways on the coast. This particular ramp here is supposed to afford lifeguard access to this stretch of beach. They should be able to get a vehicle down on the beach here, and presently that cannot happen. We have a lot of unstable riprap or revetment. The rock migrates seaward. It creates, the instability creates voids and steep sections. We hear some pretty chilling stories. We talked to a property owner a year ago who indicated that homeless residents were crawling into voids in the revetment to take refuge. Those voids eventually collapse when the sand underneath them subsides. So it's a potentially lethal situation. And then finally, we have property owners that are conducting unpermitted work because of the level of concern and their fear of a process, be that through the city or through the Coastal Commission. And often this work has the unintended consequence of actually exacerbating some of the wave uprush and inundation that occurs. So let me share with you a series of photos. These move from north to south along that stretch of coastline that has not seen dry sand for quite some time. This is the midsection of the Strand here. We're getting toward the southern section of the Strand below Tyson Beach. You can see there is no sand. This is a relatively low tide condition here. And you can see that the strand itself is experiencing some undermining. This is a public access stairway at Ash and the Strand that we have had to close because, well, you can see why we've had to close it. It does not deposit you onto the sand. The terminus of the Strand is at Wisconsin Avenue. Wisconsin Avenue is a very important beach access portal, public beach access portal. So you're getting two images here of the same ramp that provides the only formal public coastal access to the beach here at Wisconsin. We have had to close that access due to these unsafe conditions. So we're now kind of in the midsection in the 1300 block of South Pacific. You can see along this stretch of residential development that a lot of private access ways have become quite degraded, eroded, and unsafe. I'll also point out that this is a relatively low tide you're looking at here, and you'll see that there is a lot of cobble and no dry sand. So Chris mentioned Buccaneer Beach and the presence of a groin on the north side of Buccaneer in years past. This is what Buccaneer Beach looks like today as of a few days ago. The sand is gone and it is basically a swale for seawater. This is probably our most local beach. Those of you familiar with Oceanside know that this has really become an informal community center. It's a great place to go to meet your neighbors and fellow Oceanside citizens. And it used to be a place to spend time on the sand. That's not the case right now. This is one of several beach access ways, public beach access ways that we are not in a position right now to improve because that access way would deposit you in the ocean and not on the beach. I would really like to go back to that prior slide I just skipped over. Cassidy Street is another key portal to the coast, and we have a parklet at the terminus of Cassidy Street at the ocean and a stairwell. And these are the concrete stairs that are meant to deposit folks onto the beach and to the water's edge. And then finally, I mentioned the erosion that's occurring on the perched beach. That's on the landward side of the coastal revetment on the private properties. Here's a property owner who's done the right thing, shoring up this chasm here and pursuing the proper review and permitting process, but that can't be said of all of the property owners along our coastline. So here we are at 10,000 feet. I don't know if your screen that's showing the talking heads is covering this information on the right-hand side of the page, but this is the coastline from the Santa Margarita River. You can see the river mouth there to Tyson Beach in Oceanside, identifying the boat basin and that complex, including the Finger Jetty, our South Jetty at the San Luis Rey River and Oceanside Pier. And I think this picture largely speaks for itself, but I'll give you some numbers. Del Mar Beach on Camp Pendleton has a width of about 450 feet to the typical water's edge. And that's not just dry sand, that's probably a fair amount of wet sand as well. As you go to our Harbor Beach, which is supported by the South Jetty, we average about 340 feet of navigable beach to the water's edge during a mid-tide. North Beach, which is south of the jetty, gets down to about 150 feet of navigable beach. As you go south of the pier, and the pier does have something of a sand retention component to it itself. As you get south of the pier, the beach disappears very quickly. Tyson has maybe 80 feet of navigable beach. And just at the tip of the screen here in the upper right-hand corner, that's the point at which there is no dry sand in Oceanside, and that extends for 2 miles to our boundary with Carlsbad. So I want to talk for a couple minutes about the impacts of the boat basin. And again, I appreciate Chris referencing the important role the boat basin plays in dynamics in the littoral cell. The reality is that in Oceanside, the beach erosion that we're seeing is principally occasioned by the diversion and impoundment of sand from that boat basin complex. Our proximity to that facility makes us profoundly impacted in ways that down coast cities are not impacted by that device. So we have for years exercised a lot of patience, perhaps too much patience, waiting for the federal government.
Just to give you we have 5 more. You have 5 more minutes. You've already gone over time, so I just want to make sure we get through everybody. So if you can get,
okay,
we're going to get to the meat and potatoes of what you're.
All right. Thank you, Serge. So let me just say that we've received acknowledgement for a long time from the federal government that they have a responsibility here. There have been many studies conducted, 5 in fact, not all of them completely prepared. One is outstanding now. The federal government has recently funded that outstanding study, and we do expect that study to reflect and support what is demonstrated in our sand feasibility study. It was in 2008 that we decided to conduct our own study. That study makes 2 important observations. One, that the silty sand that is gathered during the annual harbor dredging is easily mobilized, and it forms a submerged beach off coast. So it doesn't stay on our beaches for very long. And that the benefits of the regional sand beach nourishment projects have been very short-lived in Oceanside, with that sand placed in Oceanside quickly drifting southward. So the study looks at 4 pilot beach restoration projects and considers the merits and demerits of those. Beach nourishment with no retention, beach nourishment with artificial reefs, beach nourishment with a growing field, and modification of the existing South Jetty. Each of these alternatives were evaluated under a multi-criteria analysis. That's 11 criteria organized into 3 categories of technical performance, cost, and environmental impact. The growing field alternative earned the highest score, performing well in all of those categories and demonstrating the most cost effectiveness of all of those options. And while the study did consider a growing field along a segment of the strand, the ultimate location of any sand retention structures has yet to be determined. And several beach nourishment alternatives were considered. I won't get into those. You may have questions for Brian about those. He's the most appropriate person to answer those technical questions. We acknowledge that there is no available sand source at this point, and the city has not secured access to sand impounded on Camp Pendleton, but most of those sand bypass options assume that that access will be provided. Previous sand nourishment and retention studies are noted. I think one of the attributes of this study that it really does a nice job of providing the chronology of the study of our conditions and efforts to address those conditions. This study also acknowledges the social, political, and regulatory challenges that we're facing with a retention concept. But we will say that the vast majority of community members who participated in outreach activities expressed support for sand retention. And a link to this study has been provided in the chat. I'm going to move through these objectives quickly, but I do want to emphasize that one of those objectives is to augment the total sand budget within the littoral cell to the benefit of all of the cities down coast. We do see this project as, or this concept as really interim. We know under certain sea level rise scenarios that sand retention and sand nourishment has limited benefit when you have a fixed coastline. But we would want to afford time for additional monitoring of conditions, for the development of adaptive design standards for beachfront development, adjusted coastal setbacks and rolling easements. Perhaps at some point, property acquisition and repurposing of that property. And I apologize, I'm having a little bit of a challenge technically. And then giving our property owners the opportunity to do some estate planning over time. We essentially need runway to achieve these objectives. So I'm going to skip this section because I think there's some understanding of the policy framework that Coastal Commission guidance appears to be evolving. I'm happy to speak to that in the discussion. There is really nothing in the Coastal Act that precludes sand retention. The city's local coastal program supports exploration of retention. And our local adaptation plan, which is in draft form, identifies retention as a possible strategy, as does the recently adopted San Clemente coastal resiliency plan. And then recent academic work, I'm happy to talk about the Briggs et al. Paper that was published in 2020 that speaks to the fact that it may be time to explore sand retention on our coastline. And this is a study prepared by people who have typically been skeptical of that as an option. So what we're fundamentally exploring is more consistent sand nourishment supplemented by retention in some form. We know that nourishment without retention in Oceanside doesn't work, and that we can't justify sand retention alone, the cost and effort of sand retention alone. Any retention system on our coastline would be a reversible pilot project subject to performance standards and a timeline. And the retention system would be supported by a robust monitoring, reporting, and mitigation program, with the city fully committed to mitigating any adverse impacts on down coast sand transport. So we've been talking and studying and speculating for decades. We think it's time to actually do something, to actually try something, with the common understanding that if it doesn't work, we will undo it, we will learn from it, and we will pursue other options from a more enlightened perspective. And I appreciate the additional time. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thanks, Russ. Really appreciate the overview. And Terry, we're going to move on to, I promise, to Bill, so we can just get to the end and have lots of time, in theory, some time for questions. So if you don't mind, I'm going to move on to Bill O'Reilly. It's my pleasure to have he's a research and development engineer at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography and kind of a guru on long-term sediment transport. Thanks, Bill, for being here. We appreciate it. And so take it away. And you are muted.
Yep. Hi. Thanks, everyone. Russ, can you unshare your screen there? And I'll share mine then. Yes? No? Thank you. Okay. There we go. That. Okay. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm Bill O'Reilly. I work at Scripps. I'm part of the Coastal Processes group here at Scripps. It's a relatively new group in name, but we are the reincarnation of Bob Guza's field research group that did both nearshore waves and beach surveys. Right now, our group is about 25 people. The three main investigators are Adam Young, who studies cliffs and cobble. I'm sure many of you know Adam and his truck LiDAR. Mark Merrifield, who has been working on coastal flooding, like the background picture here. And Bob Guza is still with us as the emeritus professor. Luckily, he has no idea what the word emeritus means, so he's as active as ever. And what I'm going to be discussing today is mostly work that Bob has done, or the field team has collected over the last 20 years in terms of beach surveys, beach change, and some of the ideas around that, and the idea of around the river of sand in North County, some of the things that we think might be going on. So what I'm mostly going to show you today is we've started to make an annual beach report for the state beaches in San Diego County, south of Oceanside, the 9 state beaches. A significant amount of our funding comes from state parks, which now contains the California Department of Boating and Waterways that has historically funded a lot of the beach surveys.
Hi, Bill. Sorry to interrupt your presentation, but you're sharing the presenter's view right now.
I'm sharing the what?
Presenter's view instead
really?
of the presentation view.
Sorry about that.
All you have to do is click on use slideshow up at the top.
Use slideshow. I see that. And did that work? Are you seeing the normal one now?
No.
No. Your screen share is paused. Oops, let me try again. Sorry about that. Let's do this. Let's try to share that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yay, sorry about that. Okay, there, now you can actually read it more easily. So this annual beach report we make, it's just an annual update of the condition of the San Diego County state beaches. But we're looking at all the data we've collected going back to some original airborne LiDAR collected in 1997 and 98. And so really we're trying to present each year as kind of the latest chapter. And what we're seeing is that really there's a very strong El Nino driven pattern to how the shoreline has been changing since 1997. And that's really the big take home message. And this report we're doing, target audience is coastal engineers and managers. So hopefully in time, people like Chris and Brian will find this useful. Okay, so I'm going to begin with sort of the major thing that we've learned, and I'm going to present this in sort of a cartoon fashion before I show you the data, which it looks a little noisier. So the basic concept is this: is that the long-term beach evolution in San Diego County can be really thought about on 3 time scales. And the shortest time scales is seasons. So here in our cartoon, the x-axis is time and years. There's like 15 years here. The y-axis is the beach width. And you can see it goes up and down seasonally as we expect through time. However, if you start to look at things like the mean beach width for each year, and you start to see some pretty clear trends show up in the beach width data. And in many ways, this is the most important plot I'm going to show you today, the one that kind of to keep in your mind. One way to think about it is it's the Sawtooth El Nino plot. That what we see is that when we have strong El Nino winters, or even just a decent El Nino winter, the mean beach width backs up considerably. And then over the time period between that and the next El Nino, which 2 to 7 years, around here it's been 5 to 7 years, we see a trend, an overall trend in beach recovery during that time period. And then the next El Nino hits, and boom, it happens again. And so we end up with sort of the sawtooth pattern when you start fitting to the mean beach width data. Okay, and then finally, the longest time scale is that if you look at, say, the average recovery width in each of those recovery periods between El Ninos, then you start to see longer term trends, which we consider to be related to the overall sand supply. So we have our 3 time scales. When they're all together, it can look a little confusing. And I mean, one of the challenges in communicating this and understanding communicating is that we're all kind of live with the seasonal signal, right? And so that blue line is going up and down, and we have bad years, we have bad storms. And it can be sometimes lost in that is the overall kind of climate pattern that we're seeing here with our El Nino sawtooth of beach loss and recovery, and then the long-term trend with changes in sand supply. All right, so we have our little cartoon, and now let's apply this to some actual data. In this beach report, which you can find online at our siocpg.ucsd.edu site, this is sort of our main overview plot, our big kahuna plot that tries to kind of capture everything that we've seen and know about the state beaches in San Diego County since back in 1997. So on the left is just a little map of the coastline, and we show the 9 state beaches south of Oceanside. And on the right are some of these beach width versus time series plots. So in this case, the little dots you're seeing here, the symbols are annual beach widths at the different state beaches. Torrey Pines and the border beach have been split into north and south components. So there's a few more dots, a few more colors. And then the linear lines are linear fits to those dots in the time periods between El Ninos, which are shown as the gray stripes. And also shown on here are the regional beach sand projects 1 and 2, and the San Leo Lagoon restoration, the timelines, or where they show up in time. Okay. So the plot is also split into 2 plots, one for the beaches south of the San Leo Lagoon Inlet and one to the north. And the reason we do that is because they've, since the 2016 El Nino, they appear to be responding in very different ways. You can see on the right side, south of the inlet, that the beaches have been recovering since the 2016 El Nino. They all have upward trends, but frighteningly, north of the inlet, everything seems to be going downhill. So rather than getting a recovery, something happened with the 2016 El Nino and the beaches, and this kind of corresponds with what Russ said earlier. I think it goes up to Oceanside as well, that the experience in recent years is things are going downhill. And we see that in the data as well. Unfortunately, we don't have data north of the lagoon between 2010 and 2016. So it's a little, we don't have a great complete story, kind of understanding what's going to happen compared to the south, but the fact that these are all decreasing seems to be a pretty clear signal that something else is going on. Okay, so this is a plot. We're going to update this again in a few months with last year's data, which in fact, we kind of had an unusually kind of bad winter with that last January. Last year, that big storm, it was kind of like the January '88 storm, but not quite as big. So it was almost like an El Nino winter with that January storm last year. So we're going to see what that looks like. But keeping this in mind, here we are out here at the right end of this, these plots. And so in terms of thinking about where we are in the grand scheme of what the beaches are doing, we're like 5 years or 6 years into the latest recovery period from the 2016 El Nino. So the expectation is another El Nino is going to come along here pretty soon in the next few years, and we're going to get another setback, and we're going to have to begin recovery again. Okay. So that's just highlighting that. So let's look at some of these beaches. So Torrey Pine State Beach. This is the south part of Torrey Pine State Beach, so like south of Bathtub Rock down to Black's Beach, if you're familiar with that part. We consider this to be our control beach because there's no development along it. It's just bluff back the whole way. It's down at the end of the littoral cell, so it's sort of had constant feeding of sand, least impacted by the interruptions in sand, if you will, in the littoral cell. And so it's kind of like the most natural beach in San Diego County. And here we see our El Nino sawtooth pattern. And we see that these recovery time periods, when you fit that trend, is about 1 meter per year. So it gets set back some degree, depending on how strong the El Nino winter is. And then but the recovery is sort of always consistent. Whatever it gets set back, it wants to come back at about 1 meter per year naturally. Okay. Well, how about North Border Field State? So this is north of the Tijuana River mouth. Yeah, you can see it began with sort of 1 meter per year, like back between El Ninos in 2003 and 2010, but then there was a big increase in width between 2010 and 2016. And this seems to be associated with the Imperial Beach nourishment. Sand, a couple of years later, started showing up down at the river mouth, greatly expanding the beach down there. And so much larger overall trend number of 8 meters a year. And now here's Cardiff State Beach, which has also shown an increased trend compared to our natural beach of 1 meter per year from South Torrey Pines. And between 2010 and 2016, it had like 4 meters per year. But in that time period, there has been some nourishments as well as some bypassing. And so with that, I want to talk a little more about Cardiff. This is another thing that's in the beach report, is that we try to provide detailed information at each of the state beaches. And Cardiff is one where we've been doing jet ski surveys as well as beach surveys with the ATV and Dolly. And so we can see even a little more about what's been going on there. All right, so this is a plot of Cardiff State Beach. This is a mean seasonal elevation change map for Cardiff State Beach. We have the south parking lot on the left to the south, the inlet to the right. It's kind of a complicated area with Cardiff Reef on the north side, the Seaside Reef, which really extends very close to the parking lot on the south side. So the colors you're seeing are the change from summer to winter. So the big reds is the summer beach eroding, and the blue is the sand being deposited in a sandbar offshore. This is based on 10 years of data, so averaging together 10 years of survey data. And when you can calculate how much sand is moving around relative to the lowest elevation surface that the lowest elevations you collected at all these locations in this control area, and then you calculate what's my sand level above that. And that gives you kind of the known to be mobile sand. And when you do that, you come out with about 100,000 cubic meters of sand migrating seasonally along this approximately 2 kilometer section of coastline. All right. What we also see in here is that we can say something about how far the sand moves and where it moves, and on average. And what we see here is that it moves roughly 200 to 300 meters in the alongshore each season, and about 100 to 200 meters offshore. Another really interesting thing to point out is just how 2D this all is how much more movement there is at the north side up near the inlet. And down here at the south parking lot, there really just isn't that much elevation change seasonally, which is sort of consistent with what people see. Again, there's a Seaside Reef that out here that is controlling the amount of sediment that can actually hang around in front of the parking lot as well. And then finally, there is a discrepancy between the erosion and deposition volumes. It's about 20,000 cubic meters, but that can be explained by the fact that pretty much on an annual basis, about that much sediment is dredged from the inlet, and it's placed here in shallow water most years. And that actually just shows up actually in this mean data set, is this springtime placement area. Every summer, basically for the summer winter difference, you're adding about 20,000 cubic meters, and that kind of explains that difference there. Okay. So we can also do some sand budgeting at Cardiff State Beach. So now on this plot, I'm showing several different things. So this is a time series over beach years. We do beach years instead of regular years to go with the summer winter climate. The brown bars are a total nearshore volume. So that the total mobile volume shown on that last map that I showed you for that whole control area, including the jet ski and the underwater portion. And then the light tan ones is just the subaerial beach part each year, and it's following where the mean MSL location is. You can see we have more years of data of the beach volume, because those were years that we were just doing subaerial surveys, like airborne LiDAR, that sort of thing. You need the jet ski in order to do the total nearshore volume. Also shown on here is the cumulative nourishment and bypass volumes starting in 1998. And these are from the Sandag report, thanks to people at Coastal Frontiers carefully logging all of that information. You can see the regional beach sand project 2 shows up in here. And this is the more recent lagoon restoration. But these little steps are the annual bypass numbers. And then finally, with the right-hand side, we have our beach width, which we see, even though they're different scales or whatever, but it generally tracks nicely with what the nearshore volumes are doing. Okay, well, let's do a little sand budgeting. So from the time period from 2007 to 2015 is a nice time period to look at. Prior to the 2016 El Nino, when clearly there was a reset of the system to a certain degree with some sand loss. But through the 2010 El Nino, which was not so severe, that doesn't seem to be the case. And so we can do kind of a nice little budget and analysis. So in that time period, 2015, about 200,000 cubic meters of sand was added in the form of bypasses and the regional Basin Nourishment project. You can see that the bypass makes up a significant amount of that, probably a little more than half. But lo and behold, if you look at the total nearshore volume for that same time period, you get about 190,000 cubic meters. So what this is saying is that sand being put into the system here along this 2-kilometer section of coastline between the two reefs is more or less being retained, was being retained during that time period. It doesn't mean that sand wasn't coming and going from the system, that there was literal drift coming in from the north and literal drift going out from the south. But what it's saying is that as this sand was added, it seems to be held on in the region like a capacitor, that it didn't mean that then more sand was then traveling down out of the system as well, that it was kind of holding on to those same levels while allowing probably some pass-through sand as well. And here's a really interesting number. If you just then look at the subaerial beach, of that 200,000, about 100,000 of it kind of shows up as mean sand volume on the beach itself. And that's kind of a cool number, that roughly half of the sediment that's put in turns out to be subaerial beach, while the other half is supporting the subaqueous part of the profile. Is that true other locations? Don't know. As it's been discussed, keeping track of sand, measuring sand movement and stuff like that tends to be a very difficult thing to do from a signal to noise point of view. One of the nice things about Cardiff, because there's been a fair amount added, given and relative to the amount of sand in the system itself, there's a pretty big signal. And so we can see these sorts of things, and now we can kind of get these sorts of relative numbers. And then finally, over that time period in this 27 to 2015, the beach width grew by, the mean beach width, annual beach width grew by about 15 meters. So that works out to be about 1 meter for every 13,000 cubic meters of sand added to the system for that 2-kilometer stretch. So we feel very good about this. We didn't go thinking that we would get these sorts of level of accuracy in these numbers. And so we think that these sort of things might be very helpful for the coastal engineers and planners working in the region. Okay. So that being said, so one of the things I wanted to point out here is that, so this is interesting. So through this time from 27 to 2015, it's like the sand seemed to stay around at Cardiff, stayed in that zone. And it wasn't until the 2016 El Nino that boom, now we had a drop, that things kind of went back to the pre-nourishment, really that nourishment in 2012 or so. It kind of went back to the pre-volume levels previous to that nourishment. But why does it stick around like that? Like, why do we get these numbers to add up so nicely? Well, we have a possible explanation for that. And that goes with the idea of the river of sand. So this is just a diagrammatic plot of the coastline for the area from Oceanside Harbor to the north, to Scripps Submarine Canyon to the south in North County. The blue you can take as the ocean, and split up the relative along coast scale is correct. And so the cities are broken up here in the along coast. Also showing the locations of the lagoons and important creeks like Cottonwood Creek at Moonlight and San Dieguito River, and then our other coastal lagoons. And this is just marking where the beaches are. I've highlighted the state beaches in green because those are the ones where we're doing the beach report for now. The other beaches are just here in yellow. We do have data at most of these beaches, and we're going to start to collect more up at Oceanside.
Bill, we're just kind of running out of time. Maybe you could just wrap it up in the next couple of minutes.
You got it. Okay. So this is the traditional river of sand. Waves comes from the north, driving sand to the south. Waves comes from the south in the summer, driving it to the north. But the winter waves are bigger than the summer waves. And so there's a net transport to the south, ending up in the submarine canyon. That's traditional view. However, we've been doing wave modeling in the area for 20 years now, and we make nearshore wave predictions. And from those, we predict which way the transport should go. And the picture we get from that looks more like this, that instead of being during non-El Nino years, so during these recovery periods, the wave model predicts reversal points just to the south of each of these lagoon and drainage locations. And so sand is not inclined to head down the coast every year during these recovery periods. And that would explain why at San Vito Lagoon at Cardiff, the sand kind of just stuck around to that time period until an El Nino came. And when the El Nino comes, and one of the other things that we're speculating may happen at these lagoons is that they tend to be a source of a little bit of sand loss at each location because the waves tend to be big at the south end of these areas, popular surfing sites. And so that a little bit of the sand might be lost each year there. But during these strong El Nino years that we have every 5 to 7 years, the sawtooth in our diagram, the model does predict the classic river of sand. The drift is not as strong south of the lagoons as other places, so it's sort of more intermittent looking like it is shown here. But nevertheless, there is net southward transport, and that is more consistent with what people have believed over time, that sand eventually makes its way down the coast. And that's what I will close with. I encourage you to go look at our website. There's a nice guide that explains these things better than I did here, as well as an overview of the beach report and individual plots for each of the state beaches. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Fascinating. And yeah, it's been interesting to see the evolution, at least at Silver Strand and Borderfield where I'm at. So anyway, appreciate that. I just want to thank, I know we had people gave a little bit of longer presentations than they were supposed to, but that was good. Thanks to Anna and Keith have gotten Sandag staff to extend the time limit to 1:30 for those of you like me who are policy nerds and can't wait to spend all afternoon talking about the stuff. So if you want to stick around to 1:30, I think we'll probably have a lot of questions or comments. I know that Christy and Terry wanted to have questions, but I really want to make sure we go to the public first to do that. So if you don't mind, we'll go right to public comments. And Anna, if you can manage that, that would be helpful, and call folks.
Sure. I'm not seeing any hands from the public right now.
Okay, and I just want to predicate this to make sure we're all clear. Sandag is not issuing a permit for a project in Oceanside. That's the Coastal Commission and the City of Oceanside that does that, and other agencies. So this is a public discussion. The more public discussion and robust discussion we have, the better for public purposes. And with that, I will take it to, I know Christy, you had a.
Oh, Chair Desina, sorry. We do have a hand from the public from Lynn Gilson.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you.
Sorry, had to unmute. Hi, thanks. Appreciated the presentations. I'm sure there is going to be a lot of great discussion. I look forward to hearing it. I did have a quick question for Chris Webb, and on the topic of opportunistic sand. And I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more about how that is judged. From what I understand, I know in Encinitas, we've had some opportunistic sand that seems to be pure sand. And then there has been other times things have been put onto the South Ponto Beach that has been an awful lot of cobblestone that's been dredged out of the Batasquitos Lagoon. And so it seems like the opportunistic sand has a very wide range of what that is. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to do that, Ms. Gilson. Opportunistic sand is typically defined within pretty narrow parameters. So some of what you're seeing that came out of Batasquitos Lagoon was probably simply the maintenance dredging of the lagoon, which isn't considered opportunistic sand so much. It's more sand bypassing out of a temporary trap. What opportunistic sand is intended to be is new sand brought into the littoral zone from outside the littoral zone. So it's a new supply. And what we've had to do is define its parameters compared to the existing grain size of the sand that's on the beach that would receive it. So we develop an envelope of the range of grain sizes that are on that beach that would receive the material, and then we compare the grain size of the material with that to see if it falls within the envelope of the existing grain sizes on the beach. There is some tolerance to stray slightly outside of the limits of the existing beach, but only by a certain percentage, like 10% on either end. So it's not a lot. And it needs to be mostly sand. It needs to be, defined as about 80% sand, maybe 20% either silts and clays or a combination of silts and clays and some cobble. Some cobble's okay, but a relatively small proportion. And then finally, we have to do a rigorous analysis of the chemistry too. Typically, it's tested against a suite of chemicals that's called bulk chemistry testing, which includes just a really long list of chemicals that are evaluated and compared against federal standards put out by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And if those chemistry results come back as exceeding the federal standards, it's considered a hit. And so it's probably not suitable. If it doesn't hit, then typically chemistry can be considered clean. So those are just some of the pieces of information that I wanted you to know about. It's a little narrower range, I think, than what you're thinking. And I'd be happy to talk to you more at any time about it if you want to follow up the conversation.
Thank you. That does help quite a bit. And if I could ask one other quick question then of Mr. Cunningham. The studies that Oceanside did showing, the groins really help sand retention in Oceanside. Did those studies include how much sand is then allowed to move further south into the other North County beaches? Or how much?
Thank you for that question. And what I will share from my layperson's perspective is that it's really essential that we keep in the conversation the nourishment component of this project and the extent to which what we're conceiving would be adding considerable sand to the budget, so to speak, in the southern reach of the littoral sill. But I really think it best for Brian to speak to this question.
Sure.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah. So within the project, we modeled a certain amount of prefill, so amount of sand placed directly within the groin field or compartments. And then we had a certain fraction that would go downdrift of the groins to offset the downdrift impact. So that's the new sand source that Russ was talking about that this project would potentially introduce to the cell. We're still, that was a feasibility study phase, and the next phase will be refining those values. But yeah, with the amount that we've placed downdrift, we think we're close to being able to mitigate downdrift impacts. We know there's monitoring and triggers that will be set to try to further mitigate those impacts as if the project were constructed as proposed.
Thank you.
Great. Hey, thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Brian and Russ and Chris. And so I know that on deck, Christy and then Terry. Go ahead, Christy.
Thank you, Chair Dedina. I do see that Laura Walsh from Surfrider got her hand up just as a public speaker. And would you like to go to her first?
Actually, Laura's on the committee, but that's fine if you want to go first.
Oh.
Whatever you guys think. I think I'm like a technical advisor, so I wasn't sure when to raise my hand.
Christy, go ahead. You had your hand up first.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you so much for Scripps. That beach study was really fascinating. My question does go to the Oceanside groin feasibility study. And just to be transparent, I am from Solana Beach, and Solana Beach, I'm a council member, and we do have really strong concerns about the groins, and not only just for the environmental reasons, and I won't touch on those, but we were just beginning to hear some of the information regarding whether or not this study touched on the impacts for the downstream beaches, because obviously they're going to be hugely affected. And I see this as so much more of a regional problem, and I think that all of us should be involved. I think that we probably should get together a subcommittee maybe to all meet regularly on this, because when the northernmost beach is doing something with this permanent retention, all of us downstream are affected. So I just wanted to make that clear that I didn't hear enough about you studying the impacts on us that are downstream from you. So thank you.
Chair, would you like me to respond to Ms. Becker's comment?
Sure, yeah, you're Brian, I guess.
Yeah, Ms. Becker, thank you so much for the question. It speaks to what I was not able to address in my presentation, given time constraints, which is, as we move on to a subsequent phase of this project, and I want to be the first to say that outreach over the course of the first phase was very well intentioned, but could have been broader and could have been more robust. And we have every intention of, to the extent that we haven't engaged your jurisdiction and others, we have every intention of making up for that. We are early in this process. And I'll let Brian speak to the extent to which impacts down coast have been addressed thus far and how they will be addressed going forward.
Russ, I don't think I'll say too much more than I stated previously, in that we scratch the surface essentially in the feasibility study phase, and within this next phase we'll be kind of digging deeper into that and making sure that's primary impact of top of mind type of impact for this study. So we absolutely plan to try to offset those impacts and again bring this new source of sand into the system.
Anything else, Christine?
I will cede my time. I see that a couple people need to be out of here by 1 o'clock. Terry Gasterland. So
Terry, thank you, and Terry, take it away.
Great. I'm just going to share my screen really quick here. What I want to show is this is the table from the Oceanside report, and I want to draw attention to groins at 81% and reefs at 73%. So these are weighted scores. And the big difference is the financial here and here. And what I'd like to see this committee doing is to ask for more evaluation of reefs versus groins. We looked at reefs extensively during our sea level rise technical advisory committee studies and developing our adaptation plan. So these artificial reefs are really high on our list. So it's the life cycle costs. This is where the 10-point difference comes, or the 8-point difference comes in. Life cycle costs for reefs versus groins. And otherwise, these two approaches are absolutely equal, except that the reefs are much friendlier and address exactly what Councilmember Becker was just talking about. So I'll stop share there. I wanted to point that out. This is the table from the Oceanside report from the Oceanside consultants.
Thanks.
So
Could I respond to that, or?
Could I jump in real quick? This is Ryan from Oceanside. Just before everyone gets off at 1, I just want to make a quick policy statement. This has been an important project for me, and I want to just reiterate the fact that we don't want to do anything that's going to negatively impact any of our neighbors. This is truly a regional concept and approach, and that's why I think the outreach is just beginning. Ideally, I would like us to be able to add sand to everyone's beaches. And so if we have a project that really stops sand flow to the south, I'm not going to support it. But I do think we can come up with a collaborative effort that doesn't impact any of our southerly cities. And we really can replenish all of our beaches. So, if we could just to have that sentiment here today, though, that I thought the subcommittee idea was great, but to have that regional approach, if we can further explore that, I can tell you that is the goal of Oceanside Council and our leaders. We really want to be a regional partner and just kind of fix this beach erosion problem for all San Diego.
Great. Terry, I guess Terry, I'm not sure if Terry's here or not. I can't see her, but
I'm still here.
Oh, there you are. Okay. I can't see everybody. Did you want to respond to that, or anything? I know you have to go, so.
Yeah, I think a regional approach is the right way to go. The artificial reef option is one that in our evaluation in Del Mar 3 years ago, really looked like it could work. So, there may be some combination of how to make our shoreline sustainable. And I really want to thank Chris Webb, especially for all those photos of Oceanside. It highlights that there are problems here and we need to think about them seriously. Thank you.
Well, if we were doing a public workshop in person and I had one of those, charts to write on, the parking lot issue would be obviously the regional approach, obviously, and then, what Bill talked about with just the nature of how the lagoon entrances work. And so, interesting stuff. And also the accretion downstream. And so a lot of things we could be talking about, but I think the dialogue is really important. And I know Laura, Kelly, I'm not sure who else is on there, but Laura, take it away, then you can be followed by Kelly.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to point out the difficulty of developing a regional approach when $1 million has already been dedicated to a design and permit phase of a project. I think, Surfrider's here because we don't want to see any city operating in a vacuum. And, I'm glad some of the North coastal cities are asking questions, since the tail end of Bill's presentation was all about how that's where sand accretion on those beaches comes from, is from up north. And the other thing I just want to point out is the scale of the project, because Surfrider has kind of followed along the local conversations in Oceanside. And what we're talking about as a pilot is 4 600+ foot long groins. The last groin approved by the Coastal Commission was about 48 feet, and it was not for the sole purpose of sand retention. So this is an enormous project. And as I think someone mentioned earlier, when the pilot was brought up, and there is a desperate interest in sand in Oceanside, it's definitely true. But when this option was brought up and the permitting location was discussed, everyone in South Oceanside said, oh my gosh, this is going to block sand on our beaches, which is why now the pilot is being talked about as an 18 groin field for like 2.5 miles of beach. So, that domino effect already hypothetically is playing out just within the city of Oceanside. What's the incentive for the city to prepare contingency planning, to mitigate that, to avoid that for the entire region? We're super worried about it.
Anybody want to comment? Panelists want to comment? Or
I'd like to respond.
Sure, go ahead, Ryan.
So I don't think the pilot project's been to 18 groins. I mean, there were discussions. I don't think we know what it looks like yet. I was concerned when the 4 initial groins, the length of them and their location, which was just south of the pier. So we're so early in this phase, and $1 million does not stop the conversation. And I just want to put it in perspective for what our city's been going through. We've had a sand feasibility study that the Army Corps of Engineers was ordered to do by Congress almost 20 years ago. And we don't get any response. And we're getting to a point of our beaches where, as you heard, 2/3 of our beaches don't have dry sand. So I think this, for me, this started the conversation. And this is, we had to take some action to start moving forward. And like I said, I don't know what this is going to look like at the end of the day, but I was concerned with the pilot project and location, but that's why we're discussing it and looking for ways to move forward. But the $1 million and this study has really kickstarted one of our really, with our ARPA money that we got, we did a survey from our residents about our most important concerns for the city. And the top 2 by far that stood out was homelessness and beach sand. I mean, it's that important to our city. It's not the beachfront homeowners. The majority of activists and the proponents of doing something are inland that just enjoy the beaches. I mean, that's just like we're all the same in our cities. That's it's a character of our cities, our coastline. So it's critical that we do something. So I think that is important to me, that we're starting this conversation and having these hard discussions about what we can do.
Laura, I want to echo the council members' comments and just say, as I mentioned in the chat, that you speak to the $1 million that we've dedicated to a subsequent phase here. We're devoting a lot of budget and resources to ensure that there is robust outreach, engagement, and coordination within the region and the sub-region and at the state level as well. So that is a priority component of this next phase.
Laura, you want to, and there you want to additional comments or?
Yeah, I mean, I think I appreciate the perspective and where they're coming from.
Brian, I wasn't sure if you wanted to say anything or. You okay? Good, okay. Trying to facilitate dialogue here. It's not easy on Zoom. It'd be much better in person, but hopefully that'll happen and in the field. Kelly, go ahead.
Thank you. So I appreciate the clarity and the insight that so far we've received as part of this group from the city of Oceanside to understand the process. And what I'm hearing from my fellow southerly cities is that there's an interest to be engaged in this process as formal stakeholders. And at the beginning, this presentation kicked off with some updates from Sandag about consolidation of working groups and sort of clarifying some of the roles that we have here. And so, I look to Serge and Dwight that have some of that historic knowledge about how this group can possibly participate as a formal stakeholder in the design and permitting process as we move forward, because I think that for the three aspects that are most important to the southerly cities, which would be the monitoring of the littoral cell budget, if that really does increase, the mitigation, if we find that it doesn't, and then something that was mentioned at the end of the presentation, that there could be an eventual removal if this isn't successful. I think we all would like to be formal stakeholders in that process. I don't know how that would look. Councilmember or Deputy Mayor Becker suggested a subcommittee, but I think there's enough of us as part of this committee that would just like to perhaps do that work as part of this working group. So I don't know if Dwight, Serge, or anybody else on the call have a suggestion about that, but my point is that I think we should be formal stakeholders.
Yeah, I'm not.
Chair, let me address a little bit of the Shoreline Working Group.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Keith. I was going to defer to you. So anyway.
Yeah, so the working group exists as a collective of Sandag body to make recommendations to Regional Planning Committee. As such, we all want sand. We have sand strategies and we're all in alignment with that. If the committee wanted to take on this as a project and be formal stakeholders, there's already a process for that. That's the Oceanside project, and we can provide information for you of how you get involved in that. To create a subcommittee of the Shoreline group wouldn't be appropriate, since the focus right here for the Shoreline Committee is actions that Sandag takes. And Sandag right now has no action on this Oceanside project. So with respect, I think the best solution right now is to hear more about how Oceanside envisions how people can get involved with stakeholders and provide that as a means to the working group to get involved.
Thank you, Keith. The comments from Ms. Hines and others are well taken. In fact, staff has already started to explore this idea of establishing a regional or sub-regional oversight, or not necessarily a steering committee, but a group that will be formally assembled to maintain ongoing dialogue among stakeholders. So that's very much in our consciousness as we kind of plot out what this next component is going to look like.
Dwight, you want to, Brian, would you still have your hand up? I just want to, you have your hand up permanently. I wasn't sure. I don't want to limit what you have to say, but I'm going to switch to Dwight. Go ahead,
Okay.
Dwight.
Thank you. First, my thanks to all the presenters. I've learned a bunch. And I want to come back to what Mr. O'Reilly said in a minute, but I want to support what Kelly Hinsey was saying. I think that that's a good idea, but I think we can do it offline. It doesn't have to be through the Shoreline Committee. But we as a Shoreline Committee, what my hope is that we can get some consensus, if there is one, on do the policies that Sandag has in effect right now governing this, are they adequate, or is there a gap? Is there something better, an improvement of the policy guidance from Sandag that we could provide on these retention strategies? In a way, I admire Oceanside. They're being pioneers a bit here, and they're willing to step out and try a pilot project. And I feel a little bit remiss that I'm not sure that we at Sandag are giving them enough regional guidance on how to do that and how to do outreach and how to coordinate and how to achieve the objectives they want to do. So my first question really is maybe Chris Webb or even Keith Greer, whoever is best to answer it. Do you guys feel that we have the appropriate policies in place at Sandag, or is there something that we as the working group could study and recommend up the ladder to have something better to address this modern strategy of reefs versus groins, and how do we do that regionally without competing with each other?
I can address that and then turn over for technical issues to Chris. But Mayor Warden, you're actually correct. I think we have policies in place. The question are they dated? Do they need to be updated? And that's a very appropriate place and very appropriate thing for the Shoreline Committee to weigh in on and make a recommendation to the Sandag board about funding some updates to those current strategies. So overall policies should be reviewed. I think that's a good opportunity for the Shoreline Preservation Working Group to be involved with that. And I'll turn over to Chris to see if there's technical situations or anything that that he looks at differently.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Well, I don't think differently, but essentially the 3 documents that we mentioned conclude with this statement that Sandag should consider a pilot retention project somewhere within the region or in multiple sites within the region, monitor them, test them, evaluate them, and then make a determination as to whether or not they're worthy of keeping in place or removing. So a pilot project is exactly what the documents basically suggest to do.
Well, maybe then, Keith, we could have a subcommittee or we could have a future agenda to start diving into those policies and see what needs to be updated. I'm not sure we're in a position to do it today on the fly, but let's not let that slip away. The second thing I wanted to ask, and Kanani, I apologize, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I kind of do. Can you weigh in on the Coastal Commission's current position on these growing fields? I mean, my observation is I don't think the commission has approved a new growing project in decades. I know they've approved some repairs of existing, but what's the Coastal Commission's view on this?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that. You're correct. The commission hasn't approved any new groins in quite some time. Again, any groin projects have been repair and maintenance to existing groins. Unfortunately, we haven't been involved in the City of Oceanside's preliminary study. And so, we haven't had our engineers look at this. And I think, I appreciate Russ's comments about actively engaging the other jurisdictions and our agency in particular before going down this road too far, because we do have concerns about some of the coastal resource impacts specifically to biological resources and as well as the sand transport down the region.
Thank you for that. And let's put a carrot on that if we're going to develop some sort of working task force or subcommittee or something to facilitate coordination, that coastal be included in that. The last thing I wanted to ask, because it just kind of gave me the head spins, is to Mr. O'Reilly. I'm an old dog, and for decades I've understood that transport system, the traditional one that you described. And now, if I'm hearing you right, you're actually saying maybe that's wrong, that at least in between El Ninos, the predominant transport is north, and then in El Ninos, it kind of overcomes that and pushes it south, so that long-term, it's still predominantly a southward transporting system. But I would like you to tell me, A, am I right in my takeaway of what you've said? And B, what's your confidence level? And Chris Webb and Brian Leslie and others in this field, do you agree with him on his conclusion from what those data seem to be showing?
You're not putting anybody on the spot. There you go. Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm okay to put them on the spot. They can defend themselves.
I'll start. I will just say that, yes, I grew up with the river of sand like you did. And no, the river of sand exists, I believe, still. And I think nothing we have looked at so far means it doesn't exist. What we are saying is that it might be quite a bit more complicated river of sand than we tend to like to think about it. And those reversal points that I showed are not long stretches of the coastline. They're very short stretches of coastline south of the lagoons, where using classic Army Corps formulas with the wave information that we have would suggest that the waves are not very inclined to send the sand south most years when there's not an El Nino present. So you can think of them more as slowing down sections, in the way that the sand tends to collect around lagoons, that those are turns in the river where sand wants to collect a little bit. And then when there's a flood down the river, like in El Nino, then it all kind of washes, forward a little bit. So that's probably a little better way to think about it. There's a fair amount of circumstantial evidence kind of supporting these basic ideas, but at the same time, and because it's not refuting the idea of the river sand, it's just like assuming that everywhere on the coastline, X number of amount of sand is heading south is probably not a great assumption.
Do you or the other two experts on the panel think that you know enough about this to influence and inform policy? I mean, that what we've done so far in terms of replenishment and strategies is based on the river of sand. Are you saying that we need to revisit that and change things?
I think well, the way I look at it is that, we scientists will and should talk to the Chris Webbs of the world and just kind of give what we're seeing in our data, what the sorts of things we're pursuing, the research papers, we're trying to produce or whatever. And, and the engineers can kind of take that within the other things they're doing and see if they see ways to apply that to some of the regional sediment management planning. You can just take a very simple one with the El Nino Sawtooth pattern. That's not a theory, about the river of sand and anything. It's like what we see in the data, how the beach backs up and then it trends to increase again on a natural piece of coastline at about 1 meter per year between El Ninos. Well, if you're planning nourishment stuff, like where we are right now, like we're probably a year or two away from another El Nino, to do a big nourishment right now means that very quickly that sand is going to kind of get moved offshore in the near shore, probably still, it's not gone, but then it's going to come back slowly, for that 5 or 7 years after the El Nino. And so from a public perception point of view, or even just a expectation point of view, people could be disappointed versus if you did a big nourishment the year after an El Nino, well, now you have this long expected 5 to 7 years where the beach was going to start building back itself anyhow. It was going to bring that sand that went in offshore back into the near shore. And now you place sand then, well, now you're looking at a really nice 5 to 7 year time period where your beaches are pretty happy, right? And so simple strategies like that, as the planning goes along, may help. The other thing is where I showed you at Cardiff, where all these annual bypasses, it's like the little engine that could, these little bypasses they do every year really explained a lot of the improvement, the increase in the sand volume we're seeing in that area. So the timing of those, where you put it, so it doesn't migrate back into the inlet in the summer, that sort of thing, putting it a little farther south if you want past one of these reversal points to feed the next cell down, a little wave-driven subcell down. Those are things that engineers might be interested in trying to explore.
Chris, would you agree it might be prudent to take this information and take a look at our policies with it and update them?
Yeah, what I would have concluded if that was for me, Dwight, was that this, to me, it suggests that first your policy is sound. Your policy doesn't need to be redone, but it's a fine tuning of the policy with regards to timing, placement locations, et cetera, which, by the way, is significantly borne out in Sandag's monitoring by Coastal Frontiers as well. So some of the same stuff that Dr. O'Reilly's seeing has been documented by Coastal Frontiers too. So there's consistency in the scientific work. And I think fine tuning of the policy, sure, reevaluating it, of course, is a great idea, but I think it'll result in a fine tune as opposed to a definition of the policies.
All right, thanks. I'm going to stop. I don't want to hog all the time other than I will say I'm happy to volunteer. If there's going to be some kind of follow-up group or subcommittee, I would very much like to be involved.
Yeah, I just like to say, Dwight, because you put me on the spot too. I agree with the oversimplicity of the river of sand. And I think that these management actions within our lagoons play a really important role, both the timing of when these placements happen, like Agua Hedionda, for example, which moves a significant volume of sand, like on the order of 300 to 500,000 cubic yards. These are like major constriction points in this river of sand. Like as sand moves down from Oceanside, it's depositing within that lagoon. Poseidon, who now does that dredging on the 3-year frequency, decides where to put it. And if they put it to the north, which they put a lot to the north currently, that really disrupts how much is going south and is feeding beaches to the south. So I think the management actions play a big role, as well as the science of these literal subcells or compartments that Bill was speaking to.
Thanks for that, Brian. And do you or any of the other experts, is this strictly North County, or can we take any of this and transport it to South Bay?
It is somewhat transportable to the South Bay that down at Imperial Beach, it's not so much an existing lagoon inlet, but that was always a very low-lying area. But Bonnie Ludka, who was a postdoc here, recently published a paper about the transport of the regional beach sand nourishment down in IB. And there is a sort of a similar thing. She was able to relate it to what this wave model predicts, what the relative littoral transport should be along the coastline. She was able to relate what the model did there to what the sand was actually doing. But yes, that in general, wherever you have a drainage location on the site that historically, over geologic time, has brought a fair amount of sediment down to the beach, this tends to develop a little sediment fan offshore on the inner shelf out in 20, 30 meters water depth. And that's a focusing lens for waves. And that's why we see this focusing of the waves to the south side of the lagoon areas. There tends to be an erosion hotspot there. But when you focus the waves, you kill, by focusing and them turning, they're more shore normal, and you kill the driving of the sediment to the south. So that's why those things seem to be combined in the wave model. It says, yes, I have higher waves here. And just to the south where I have the higher waves, when I add up the total transport for the whole year, it actually wants to be near zero or even to the north. And so those things kind of come in pairs. So any drainage location along the coastline, all the way up to we've done this for other parts of California as well. And it's a standard physical pattern.
Thanks for that. Serge cut me off if there's anybody else, but I don't see another hand up. So I'd like to ask Chris Webb, is there enough
go all
sand?
day. Sure. Are there any other questions or comments from anyone else? I mean, we could all, just want to make sure.
Okay.
This is good. No, it's good discussion.
Is there enough sand north of the Oceanside Harbor if there could be an effective bypass, would that fix the problem?
It sure would go a long way toward it, Dwight. The answer is, yeah, I think there is. That's where basically the sand rests right now.
And why did the Inman Scripps bypass fail that was tried back when?
Well, the bypass that was installed by the Corps of Engineers in the late 80s, and it failed because of lack of maintenance and the cost to perform that maintenance over time. Anytime there's something placed in salt water in the surf zone, which that was, is just going to have problems. So we suggested a different type of bypassing, not a pipe on the beach, but a dredge off of the beach at the river delta, just pumping stuff around the harbor. It costs more, but it's way better in terms of effect. Let me say one last thing. I'll be super quick. South County's a little different than North County because of the bathymetric effects and wave refraction effects around Point Loma and on the delta of the Tijuana River, which generally drives the net transport to the north from IB to Coronado. So while Oceanside tends to head south, IB tends to have it reversed, all of their seasonal stuff. So it's more complicated down there, Dwight. It's not as simple.
Yeah, I was going to say, IB, we learned a lot, and we learned a lot from Scripps and also from, obviously, Chris Webb and Sandag carried out the sand replenishment project in 2011. It was fascinating to see how dynamic our zone, and we've been down to the beach, the dye studies with Falk Feddersen, and really learning the sediment transport offshore from at least our beaches, very complicated. What you see near shore, mid shore, and more further offshore, that has a lot to do with sewage transport as well. It impacts Coronado literally, and I say that because it just shows how dynamic the zone is. Coronado will get sewage in 8 hours. It's 12 miles north of us with south wind and south wind in the winter, right? So anyway, it's a very, very dynamic zone. One thing I was just going to say, though, that I think for my colleagues in North County, and Coronado and IB learned this when we have our ongoing sewage crisis, right? The existing structures at the International Boundary Water Commission and the Water Board and Surfrider as well, right? Nothing worked to address this complex issue that we had. We didn't wait. We created our own structure. So we created our own working group, Coronado, IB, City of San Diego, Chula Vista, the port, Surfrider is involved, EPA and our congressional delegation and others to quickly move this issue and really develop our own framework for working it. And so I think I wouldn't wait for slow moving policy changes at Sandag. And I say that with all due respect, but if you guys need to work and form working groups with your colleagues in Oceanside, do so, right? Don't wait for a bylaw change to do that. I think there's plenty of, it's not like And IB, we do that. I'm sure you do that all the time on projects. IB and Coronado work together on lots of different things that don't have formal structure. It's very helpful. So on issues even related to beach protection. So I would just urge you guys to look at that. And then finally, it's clear that, and I think Brian, that's really helpful, and Bill, we have this river of sand, but we have so many things in between that come into play on how sediment transport happens. But at the end of the day, it's all of the above. If we can do sand bypass, look at lagoon restoration, all different kinds of things. Those are things that we've learned in Imperial Beach, where one size doesn't fit all. And there's lots of different things we're going to have to do. But frankly, current regulatory structures for addressing what was in theory a static process that changed and fluctuated, that wasn't impacted, that didn't acknowledge sea level rise and climate change, no longer work to help us figure out how to move more quickly and address these crises. And that's why I say I was gratified to see what happened to Del Mar and Sandag working together with other agencies to quickly, in theory, do some short and medium term fixes for the train trestles, and stabilize the cliffs, because that's unusual in government right now. We're not, and we see this on the border, we're set up on a time scale that is very slow and ponderous, does not allow us to deal with these crisis situations, and does a lot. And then finally, one thing I think we've all learned is that in the recent, having a meeting and public engagement where 200 people show up to yell and scream is good to check a box, but it's not going to help Oceanside and other stakeholders work together proactively to figure things out. The most productive, sessions we've had in Imperial Beach, and especially with the port, have been more workshop type settings where people calmly discuss things and with people, rather than just have a meeting where someone talks and then people yell, right? That's just, I think my colleagues in Del Mar and I would probably, what we've learned from the LCP process is the old way of public engagement, I think a lot of us are learning, doesn't help us do stakeholder engagement and consensus driven sort of policy. And I think there's a lot of consensus and collaboration that can happen here. We've got to be smarter than the way that we've been doing things, because the way we've been doing things doesn't work and it's too slow. That's just my unbiased opinion. Laura.
Chair Didina, we do have two hands from the public. I'm not sure if you want to take one.
Laura, so go ahead, Laura, and I'm not sure who else is.
I just want to say really quickly, I love the idea of participating in a working group. I think Surfrider would be happy to do it, and I do want to slightly put just friendly pushback on the emergency characterization, since we have been talking about it growing in Oceanside for a very, very long time now, in different regions. So I really hope that working group can acknowledge that sea level rise is now a steady beat of a trend, and we can think about some of the longer term solutions as well. So thanks for bringing that up.
Great point. And we're ready to end. So Anna, who else has their hand up?
Julia from the public.
Hi, I'll be real quick. Thanks for the time. Julia Chen here, representing Coastal Consulting, and I just wanted to express my support for the outside stakeholder process, whether Oceanside organizes that or otherwise, and tell just a quick cautionary tale that some of you may remember and some maybe weren't on board yet. But when the Coastal Storm Damage Reduction Project came through permitting for the city of Encinitas and Solana Beach, the cautionary tale is getting married to one solution before you have that formal buy-in regionally and with the permitting agencies. And that had to go through permitting twice with extra expense and extra time because the impacts were just too great at the 2-year mark at equilibrium. So hope that we can learn from that in this process and just kind of echo and emphasize looking at the recreational impacts or potential benefits of the project, and happy to help in any way I can, but great to see some familiar faces. Can't wait till we can meet in person eventually, ever. Thanks.
Thanks, Julia. Great to hear from you. Thanks for all your long-term work on this committee and in general. Laura, I see you have your hand up again, but I want to end, if you guys don't mind, I want to end because I think we're running out of time. Anna, any other questions or comments?
We have one more person, John Conover.
Okay, you have 30 seconds. John, go ahead. Are you there? All right, we're not hearing. I'm going to wrap it up.
Here I am.
Oh, there you go, John.
Thanks for calling me. Russ, I would suggest you refer to Newport Beach, where I grew up surfing, with your groins, and show how it doesn't, it takes care of sand for its own self and doesn't steal for especially in our case, beaches downriver. There's no new sand coming to Oceanside, so it can't steal any sand that's heading south. We need sand on the beaches everywhere, and you need to fill in with dredging offshore for your beach. We need to find a way to take all of this information, which has been around for 30 years and it's been really fine-tuned thanks to you guys, and come up with how much sand is there, how much does it cost to get it on shore, and who's going to get the money from where? The big question, and I don't know if that takes a separate committee, but I'll be glad to help with that. So again, thanks guys. To give myself who I am, I founded Surfrider Foundation, the chapters. I did the Reese San Diego project, which was a public awareness that helped with the initial project for dredging in 2000. And I published the San Diego Tide Count for the last 40 years. So thanks for listening.
Hey, thanks, John. Appreciate it. Well, I appreciate everyone granting us their extra time. To all our panelists, really appreciate it. Really good, robust discussion. At least from an outside perspective, I would argue that we're all in agreement. We need to do something, and we all need to work together better to do it. So, and there's a lot of tools in the toolbox to work on, and that we definitely need to work with our stakeholders. So that's a good start, I think. So with that, I'm going to call the meeting adjourned at 1:31 p.m. Pacific Coast time. And thank you guys, all of you, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thanks,
Thanks,
Sam.
everybody.
Wow.
Thanks, Serge.
Thanks,
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.